The moment I stepped out of the oncology clinic, my heart stopped. There she was. Melissa, my daughter-in-law. The woman my son swore had abandoned him for another man 9 months ago. She was sitting on the cold concrete, 8 months pregnant, sobbing into her hands. But the words she whispered next didn't just break my heart. They revealed that my own son had been slowly killing me for months. Let me take you back to the beginning of that morning. The waiting room at Boston Oncology Clinic smelled of antiseptic and expensive leather, a combination that had become sickeningly familiar over the past 6 months. I sat in the cushioned chair, my 62-year-old bones aching in ways they never had before, watching the autumn leaves drift past the window like golden whispers of mortality. Dr. Helen Park had been my physician and friend for over 20 years. She was the one who first detected the abnormalities in my liver function tests, the one who had been monitoring what she believed was an unfortunate side effect of aging and stress. But lately, even she seemed puzzled by my declining health. I built Hartwell Pharmaceuticals from nothing. 40 years of my life poured into developing medications that saved thousands of lives. $80 million in assets. A legacy that should have made me proud. Yet, here I was, feeling like a hollow shell of the man who once commanded boardrooms and inspired scientists. The fatigue had started subtly, perhaps 8 months ago. A heaviness in my limbs that I attributed to long hours. Then came the dizzy spells, always at the worst moments, during board meetings, during important calls with the FDA. My son Daniel had been so attentive, bringing me supplements every morning, insisting I take better care of myself. Such a devoted son, everyone said. How lucky I was to have him. Dr. Park called my name, pulling me from my thoughts. Her examination was thorough. Her brow furrowed in that way that told me she was concerned but trying not to show it. She ordered more blood work, mentioned something about consulting with a specialist, and scheduled a follow-up appointment. I nodded through it all, too exhausted to ask the questions that clawed at the back of my mind. Why was I getting worse instead of better? Why did my body feel like it was slowly shutting down? The October air hit me like a gentle slap as I pushed through the clinic's glass doors. The sun was bright, almost mocking in its cheerfulness, and I squinted against it as I reached into my pocket for my sunglasses. My driver, Marcus, would be waiting in the parking garage, patient as always. That is when I saw her. At first, my mind refused to process what my eyes were telling me. A pregnant woman, sitting on the concrete bench near the entrance, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Something about her posture, the way she held herself even in despair, struck a chord of recognition deep in my chest. I took a step closer. Then, another. Her hair was longer than I remembered, tangled and unwashed. Her clothes were clean but worn, the kind you find at thrift stores when you have no other options. But it was her hands that confirmed what my heart already knew. Those slender fingers with the small scar on the left thumb from a laboratory accident 3 years ago. Melissa, my daughter-in-law, the brilliant chemist who had worked in our research and development department before marrying my son. The woman Daniel claimed had stolen proprietary formulas and fled to California with her personal trainer, abandoning their marriage without a word. She looked up. Our eyes met, and in that fraction of a second, I saw something that turned my blood to ice. It was not guilt. It was not shame. It was pure, undiluted terror. She scrambled to her feet, her pregnant belly making the movement awkward and painful. Her eyes darted around like a trapped animal searching for escape, and before I could even call her name, she was running, or trying to run. Melissa moved with the desperate urgency of someone who had been running for a very long time. Her swollen belly swayed dangerously as she stumbled toward the parking lot, one hand pressed against her lower back, the other reaching out blindly for balance. I did not think. I simply moved. For a man who had spent the last 8 months feeling like death warmed over, I found a reservoir of strength I did not know I possessed. My legs carried me across the concrete, past the startled faces of other patients, past the security guard who called out asking if everything was all right. Melissa, wait. She did not stop. She weaved between parked cars, her breath coming in ragged gasps that I could hear even from 20 feet away. The October wind whipped her tangled hair across her face, and I saw her stumble once, twice, her hand slamming against the hood of a silver sedan to keep herself upright. I was gaining on her, not because I was fast, but because she was exhausted, because she was 8 months pregnant, because whatever hell she had been living in had stripped away every ounce of reserve she once possessed. She made it to the edge of the parking lot, where a low concrete wall separated the clinic property from a small strip of grass. She tried to step over it. Her foot caught on the edge. I lunged forward, my arms outstretched, and somehow managed to catch her before she hit the ground. We collapsed together, my back slamming against the cold concrete, her pregnant body cradled against my chest. For a moment, neither of us moved. I could feel her heart hammering against my ribs, could feel the tremors that racked her entire frame. Melissa. I breathed her name like a prayer. What happened to you? She lifted her head, and I saw the face of a woman who had been shattered and pieced back together with nothing but willpower. Dark circles ringed her eyes like bruises. Her cheekbones jutted sharply beneath colorless skin. You cannot be seen with me, she whispered, her voice cracking. Richard, if Daniel finds out, he will. He will what? I demanded. Melissa, Daniel told me you left him. He said you stole research and ran off with another man. A sound escaped her throat. It might have been a laugh. It might have been a sob. He is lying, she said, her fingers digging into my coat. He has been lying about everything. About me. About the company. About you. About me? She touched my face with trembling gentleness. You look terrible. Worse than when I left. The fatigue, the dizziness, the shaking hands. It is not natural aging, Richard. How do you know about my symptoms? I asked. My voice barely audible, because I helped develop the compound that is causing them. The world tilted. Autumn leaves, blurred into a kaleidoscope of gold and red. The pills, Melissa continued, tears streaming down her hollow cheeks. The supplements Daniel brings you every morning. They are not medicine, Richard. She leaned closer, her lips nearly touching my ear, her voice dropping to a whisper that would haunt me for the rest of my life. They are poison. And your son is the one who has been feeding them to you. Poison. My son. Feeding them to you. The words echoed through my skull like a death sentence. I wanted to reject it, to believe that Daniel, my flesh and blood, could never do something so monstrous. But as I looked into Melissa's hollow eyes, I saw no madness, only the exhausted clarity of someone carrying a terrible truth for far too long. We need to move, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Can you stand? She nodded weakly. I helped her to her feet, keeping one arm around her waist to steady her trembling frame. Her belly pressed against my side, and I felt the baby kick, a sharp reminder that 2 lives depended on my next decisions. I pulled out my phone and dialed Marcus. He answered, on the first ring. Bring the car to the east side. Service entrance. Now, Marcus Webb had been my driver for 15 years. A former Marine who asked no questions when discretion was required. 3 minutes later, the black Lincoln pulled up beside us. Marcus helped me guide Melissa into the back seat, his weathered face betraying nothing. The Liberty Hotel, I said. Private entrance. And Marcus, we were never here. He gave a single nod and pulled away from the clinic. Melissa huddled against the far door, arms wrapped protectively around her stomach. In the muted light, she looked even more fragile. I could count the bones in her wrists. When did you last eat? I asked, softly. She shrugged. Yesterday, maybe. There is a shelter on Cambridge Street. A shelter. My daughter-in-law, who once commanded a 6-figure salary, had been eating at homeless shelters while my son lived in a $3 million penthouse. Melissa, I need you to tell me everything, She stared out the window for a long moment before speaking. It started about a year ago. Daniel came to me with a project. Off the books, he said. A new compound to accelerate metabolic processes. He wanted my help with the formulation. I listened, my stomach churning. I did not ask enough questions at first. She continued. He was my husband. I trusted him. But when I saw the complete formula, I realized what it actually did. It was designed to cause gradual organ failure, liver failure specifically, slow enough to look natural, untraceable in standard toxicology panels. My hand gripped the armrest until my knuckles turned white. You helped him create this? Tears spilled down her cheeks. I did not know what it was for. I thought it was theoretical research. When I confronted him, demanded to know why he needed something like this, he just smiled. She turned to look at me. Her expression haunted. He said, it was for you. He said, you had lived long enough, that it was time for the next generation to take over. He called it the succession plan. My own son. The boy I taught to ride a bicycle. The young man I proudly watched graduate from Harvard. He had been methodically poisoning me for months. But that is not the worst part, Melissa whispered. When I threatened to go to the police, he said he would have me committed. He had already prepared documentation proving I was mentally unstable. And if that did not work, he said there were other ways to keep me quiet. She placed her hand on her swollen belly. He said accidents happen to pregnant women all the time. The Liberty Hotel rose before us like a fortress of brick and history. Once a jail, now a sanctuary for the wealthy. Tonight, it would become a hiding place for a pregnant woman running from her own husband. Marcus pulled into the private entrance, away from the main lobby's prying eyes. I had called ahead, using a false name and paying triple the rate for discretion. The night manager met us at the service elevator, his expression carefully blank as he handed over the key card. Room 712, he said quietly. As requested. Sir. No record of the booking. I pressed a folded 100 into his palm. You never saw us. The suite was warm and softly lit. Melissa stood in the doorway, her eyes wide as she took in the plush furniture. The king-sized bed with its mountain of pillows, the fully stocked minibar. After months of shelters and park benches, it must have seemed like another planet. Sit down, I said gently. I am going to order food. I called room service and requested everything I could think of. Soup, bread, fruit. While we waited, I helped Melissa settle onto the couch, wrapping a cashmere throw around her thin shoulders. She ate slowly when the food arrived, her hands shaking as she lifted the spoon. I watched her in silence, my mind racing through everything she had told me. Daniel. Poison. Succession. Plan. The words circled like vultures over a dying animal. When she finally pushed the tray aside, some color had returned to her cheeks. She reached into the pocket of her worn jacket and pulled out a small black object. A USB drive. I did not run empty-handed, she said, holding it out to me. When I realized what Daniel was planning, I copied everything. The research files, the formulas, the test results. I took the drive, feeling its weight in my palm. Such a small thing to contain such enormous betrayal. There is more, Melissa continued, her voice dropping. The compound Daniel is using on you. It was not just theoretical. He tested it. Tested it? On whom? She swallowed hard. Patients. 3 of them. They were part of a secret trial that was never registered with the FDA. Daniel told them it was a new liver treatment. They trusted your company's name. Richard. They trusted you. The room seemed to tilt. 3 people? They are dead. All 3 of them. The official causes were listed as natural complications. Heart failure. Organ shutdown. But I saw the internal reports. I saw what really killed them. I felt bile rise in my throat. My company, my name, used to murder innocent people who came to us seeking help. The drive contains everything, Melissa said. Patient records, autopsy discrepancies, financial trails showing how Daniel funded the secret trials, and the formula itself. With my notes explaining exactly how it works, she leaned forward, her eyes burning with desperate intensity. 3 people are dead, Richard. 3 patients who trusted your company. And if we do not stop him, you will be the 4th. I stared at the USB drive in my hand. Such a small thing. Such terrible power. Why did you not go to the police? She laughed bitterly. With what proof? Daniel made sure all the official records were clean. The only evidence is on that drive, and he has spent months telling everyone I am mentally unstable. Who would believe the crazy ex-wife over the brilliant heir to Hartwell Pharmaceuticals? She was right. Daniel had built his trap perfectly, but he had not counted on one thing. He had not counted on me finding her first. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the armchair beside Melissa's bed, watching her chest rise and fall, my mind churning through decades of memories that now felt like lies. Daniel at 5 years old, laughing as I pushed him on the swing. Daniel at 18, shaking my hand after graduation. Daniel at 30, standing beside me at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for our new research facility. My pride. My legacy. My murderer. By dawn, I had made my decision. I needed to see him. Not to confront him. Not yet. But to look into his eyes and search for some trace of the boy I thought I knew. I left Marcus stationed outside Melissa's door with strict instructions. No one enters. No one knows she is here. The drive to Back Bay took 20 minutes. Daniel's penthouse occupied the top floor of a converted brownstone. I had helped him buy it 3 years ago as a wedding gift, a home for him and Melissa to build their future together. Now she was hiding in a hotel room, and I was standing outside his door, wondering if my son was a monster. I knocked. The door swung open. Daniel Hartwell, 36 years old, tall and handsome, with my late wife's green eyes and my stubborn jaw. He wore a silk robe, his hair still tousled from sleep. Dad. His face shifted into concern. What are you doing here so early? I studied him, searching for cracks in the mask. Can I come in? Of course. He stepped aside. I was just about to make coffee. Have you been taking your supplements? The question hit me like a fist to the stomach. Every morning for 8 months, he had asked me that same question. I managed a weak nod. I came to talk about the company. His eyes flickered with something I could not identify. He led me to the leather sofa, and I noticed changes since my last visit. New artwork, fresh flowers, a woman's silk scarf draped over a chair. Are you seeing someone? I asked carefully. Before he could answer, a door opened down the hallway. Footsteps padded across the floor. And then, she appeared. Victoria Slade, 38 years old, Director of Research and Development at Hartwell Pharmaceuticals. A woman I had personally promoted, based on Daniel's recommendation. She was wearing a robe I recognized. Cream silk with delicate lace trim. It had belonged to my wife, Dr. Hartwell. She said smoothly. What a pleasant surprise. I stared at her, then at Daniel. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. This was not a recent affair. The comfort between them told me this had been going on for months. Dad, I can explain, Daniel began. I held up my hand. How long? Victoria answered. Long enough. Daniel has been under tremendous pressure with your illness. I have simply been offering support. Support. In my dead wife's robe, while my daughter-in-law ate scraps at homeless shelters. I see, I said quietly. Well, I will not keep you. In fact, I have been thinking about stepping back from the company. Perhaps it is time for the next generation. His eyes lit up with barely concealed hunger. We should discuss this properly, he said eagerly. I will bring your supplements by this evening, and maybe Victoria can prepare something special to help you relax. I forced myself to smile. That sounds wonderful. I drove away from Daniel's penthouse with steady hands and a heart full of ice. The mask I had worn in front of him and Victoria had cost me more than I could measure. Every instinct had screamed at me to grab my son by the throat and demand answers. Instead, I had smiled and played the fool. Marcus was waiting when I returned to the Liberty Hotel. His face remained impassive, but I caught the question in his eyes. "She is still sleeping," he reported. "No visitors. No calls. Good. Keep it that way." I found Melissa awake, sitting up in bed with the USB drive clutched in her hand like a talisman. She looked better after a night of real sleep, though the shadows beneath her eyes would take more than one night to fade. "You went to see him," she said. It was not a question. I sat down heavily in the armchair. I needed to know. And I saw Victoria Slade in his bed, wearing my wife's robe. Melissa closed her eyes briefly. She has been there for over a year, since before Daniel started the secret trials. I think she is the one who gave him the idea. "Tell me about her." Melissa shifted, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "Victoria joined the company 4 years ago. Brilliant chemist, ambitious beyond measure. Daniel was fascinated by her from the beginning. At first, I thought it was professional admiration. Then I started noticing things. Late nights at the office, whispered phone calls, the way she looked at him when she thought no one was watching. When did the affair start?" "About 18 months ago." Melissa's voice was flat, drained of emotion. "I confronted Daniel about it. He denied everything, called me paranoid, said I was imagining things. Then he started suggesting I see a therapist. He even had Victoria recommend one. A specialist in delusional disorders. Gaslighting," I said quietly. She nodded. "He was building a case, making everyone around us believe I was unstable. So when I finally disappeared, no one would question his version of events." I leaned forward. "What is Victoria's role in all this?" "Beyond the affair, she is the architect," Melissa replied. "The compound being used on you, Daniel could never have developed it alone. He is a businessman, not a scientist. Victoria designed the formula. She knew exactly how to make it untraceable, and she has access to the company's resources to produce it. Why would she do this?" Melissa laughed bitterly. "Power. Money. Daniel promised her everything. Once you are gone and he inherits the company, she becomes the real power behind the throne. They are planning to sell Hartwell Pharmaceuticals to GenMed Corporation for $200 million. Victoria negotiated the deal herself. $200 million. The number hung in the air like poison gas. "And the 3 patients who died?" I asked. "Test subjects," Melissa whispered. "Victoria selected them personally. Patients with existing liver conditions who would not raise suspicion. She monitored their decline, adjusted the dosage, documented everything. To her, they were just data points. I felt sick. My company, built on the promise of healing, had become an instrument of murder, and the woman responsible was sleeping in my son's bed. "Where is the proof?" I asked. "Beyond what is on the USB, Melissa met my eyes. "There is a laboratory, hidden in the basement of the research facility, level B3. That is where Victoria conducts her real work. If you can get in there, you will find everything. A secret laboratory, beneath the building I had constructed with my own hands. How do I access it?" "You do not," she said grimly. "Only Daniel and Victoria have the codes. But I know someone who might help. Someone else they betrayed." "Who?" "Dr. Samuel Reeves, the toxicologist. He was Victoria's mentor before she stabbed him in the back. Dr. Helen Park had known me for over 20 years. We had survived medical conferences together, celebrated FDA approvals together, and mourned the loss of my wife together. If there was anyone in Boston I could trust with my life, it was her. I called her private line that afternoon. "Helen, I need to see you. Today. Off the books." There was a pause. "Richard, what is going on?" I cannot explain over the phone. Can you meet me at your clinic? After hours? Another pause. Longer this time. 6 o'clock. Use the back entrance. The hours crawled by. I sat with Melissa, reviewing the files on the USB drive, each document adding another layer of horror to the nightmare my life had become. Spreadsheets tracking patient deterioration, chemical formulas annotated in Victoria's precise handwriting, emails between Daniel and GenMed Corporation discussing acquisition timelines. At 5:30, I left Marcus with Melissa and drove to the clinic alone. Helen was waiting in her private office, the blinds drawn, the overhead lights dimmed. She looked worried. "Sit down," she said, gesturing to the examination table. "You look worse than you did this morning." I sat. "Helen, I need you to run a complete toxicology panel on my blood, not the standard tests. I need you to look for everything, especially compounds designed to cause liver damage." Her eyes widened. "Richard, what are you saying?" "I am saying that someone has been poisoning me, and I need proof." She stared at me for a long moment, her clinical mind warring with her friendship. Then, she nodded once and reached for a needle. The blood draw was quick. 3 vials of dark red liquid that might contain the evidence of my son's betrayal. Helen labeled them with a false name and locked them in her personal refrigerator. "I have a colleague," she said quietly. "Dr. Samuel Reeves. He is a toxicologist, one of the best in the country. If there is something in your blood that should not be there, he will find it." "I know Samuel," I said. Melissa mentioned him. Helen's eyebrows rose. "Melissa? Your daughter-in-law, Melissa?" Daniel said. She disappeared. "Daniel says a lot of things," I replied. I gave her the abbreviated version. Melissa's reappearance, the secret trials, Victoria's involvement. With each word, Helen's face grew paler. "My God, Richard," she whispered when I finished. "If this is true, I need proof." I repeated. "I need to know exactly what they have been putting in my body, and I need to know how long I have." She picked up her phone and dialed. "Samuel, it is Helen. I have an urgent case. Can you come to my clinic tonight?" I waited in the examination room while Helen made arrangements. My mind drifted to Daniel. Where had I gone wrong? I had given him everything, the best education, every opportunity, a place in the company he would someday inherit. But someday had not been soon enough for him. An hour later, Dr. Samuel Reeves arrived. He was a thin man in his late 50s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He shook my hand firmly. "Dr. Hartwell, I have heard a great deal about you." "Likewise," I replied. "Melissa speaks highly of you." His expression flickered at the mention of her name. "Is she safe?" "For now, good." He opened his medical bag. "Now, let us see what secrets your blood is keeping." He worked quickly, setting up portable equipment I did not recognize. Helen assisted, handing him instruments and taking notes. I sat in silence, watching them work, feeling the weight of my 62 years pressing down on my shoulders. Finally, Samuel looked up from his microscope. His face was grim. "Dr. Hartwell, I need to run more comprehensive tests, but based on what I am seeing here, I believe you were right." He met my eyes, and I saw genuine sorrow there. "Someone has been poisoning you, and whoever designed this compound knew exactly what they were doing." The next 48 hours felt like an eternity. Samuel Reeves worked around the clock in his private laboratory, running tests on samples of my blood. Helen kept me updated with brief phone calls. "The results are unusual. Samuel is consulting his databases. We should have answers soon." I spent the time with Melissa, reviewing the USB files again, mapping out connections between Daniel, Victoria, and GenMed Corporation. The picture that emerged was devastating. On the 3rd day, Helen called. "Come to the clinic. Samuel has the results." I drove through Boston in a daze, barely seeing the autumn colors lining the streets. Part of me still hoped this was a terrible mistake, that Samuel would tell me my symptoms were natural, that my son was innocent. Those hopes died the moment I saw their faces. Helen and Samuel were waiting in her private office, a thick folder spread across the desk. Neither would meet my eyes at first. "How bad?" I asked. Sitting down, Samuel cleared his throat. "Dr. Hartwell, I have been a toxicologist for 30 years. I have never encountered anything quite like this." He slid a printout across the desk. "The compound in your blood is synthetic, custom designed. It mimics a natural enzyme, which is why standard panels cannot detect it. But instead of supporting liver function, it systematically destroys your liver cells." I stared at the chemical diagram. "In plain terms, Samuel, someone has created a poison specifically engineered to kill you slowly," he said. "The damage appears identical to natural liver failure. Any doctor would assume you were simply aging poorly. How long have I been exposed?" 8 to 10 months, based on concentration levels. The dosing has been remarkably consistent. Whoever is doing this understands pharmacokinetics intimately. Victoria Slade, I said quietly. Samuel's jaw tightened. Yes. I recognized her methodology. She was my student once. Brilliant, but utterly without conscience. Helen leaned forward. "Richard, there is good news. The damage is significant but not irreversible. If we stop the exposure and begin detoxification, you could make a full recovery." "How long?" "Several months," Samuel answered. "But you need to stop taking whatever they have been giving you. Completely. Today." I thought of the supplements Daniel brought every morning. The special teas Victoria prepared. "What if I cannot stop immediately?" I asked. "What if I need them to believe the poison is still working?" Both doctors stared at me. "Richard," Helen said slowly, "what are you planning?" "I need evidence. Not just blood tests. I need them to confess. If I suddenly recover, they will destroy evidence, flee the country. My son is a murderer. I need to make sure he faces justice." Samuel studied me with new respect. "You want to use yourself as bait. I want to end this. Permanently." There was a long silence. Then, Samuel nodded. "I can provide counteragents," he said. "Pills that neutralize the poison without visible effects. You can continue appearing sick while actually healing. But this is dangerous. If they increase the dose, then I need to move quickly." "How long do I have at the current rate?" Samuel's face was grim. "Maybe 3 months before the liver damage becomes critical. 3 months to catch a killer. 3 months to save my own life. It would have to be enough." The folder labeled Lab B3 contained over 200 files. Photographs, blueprints, security protocols. Victoria had documented everything with obsessive thoroughness, never imagining her records would become evidence of her own crimes. I scrolled through images of a laboratory I had never known existed. Stainless steel tables, advanced centrifuges, refrigeration units filled with vials of compounds that had no legitimate purpose. All hidden 3 floors beneath the research facility I had built. "How did they construct this without anyone knowing?" I asked. "Daniel authorized it as a renovation project 2 years ago," Melissa replied. "The official paperwork described it as expanded storage space. The construction crew signed confidentiality agreements." I clicked on the next file. A scanned document with the Hartwell Pharmaceuticals letterhead. My eyes moved to the signature at the bottom, and my blood turned to ice. It was my name. My handwriting. Authorizing the construction of a specialized research annex. "I never signed this," I whispered. "I know," Melissa replied. "Victoria forged it. She has been practicing your signature for years. 2 years ago. Around the same time my fatigue had started. Around the same time Daniel had begun bringing me those special supplements. "There are more," Melissa said grimly. "Keep scrolling." Document after document appeared. Purchase orders for restricted chemicals. signed with my forged signature, authorization forms for off-books clinical trials, budget allocations for equipment that officially did not exist, each one bearing my name. They were not just planning to kill me. I realized they were planning to destroy my reputation. Melissa nodded. Daniel would inherit a fortune and a clean conscience. He would tell everyone his father had gone senile, funded illegal experiments. He would position himself as the hero who uncovered the corruption. And Victoria, she becomes untouchable, the loyal employee who helped expose the truth. Daniel would promote her to CEO, and they would run the company together. Or sell it and disappear with $200 million. I stared at my forged signature, feeling a rage so cold it burned. 40 years of ethical research. All of it would be erased. My name would become synonymous with fraud and murder. Unless I stopped them. There is something else, Melissa said quietly. Something I did not tell you before. I turned to look at her. Her face was pale in the laptop's glow. When I realized what Daniel was planning, I did not just copy files. I sent samples of the compound to an independent laboratory in Switzerland, a facility specializing in forensic chemistry. You sent evidence overseas? Insurance, she said. If anything happened to me, the results would automatically be forwarded to the FDA, the FBI, and every major news outlet. Daniel does not know about it. I felt a flicker of hope. You brilliant woman, Melissa almost smiled. I learned from watching you. Never build a structure without a backup foundation. I looked back at the screen, at my forged signature authorizing murder. Daniel and Victoria thought they had covered every angle. They were wrong. We need to move faster, I said. If they signed that GenMed agreement 3 days ago, they expect me to die soon. When I do not, they will get suspicious. What do you suggest? I closed the laptop, my mind racing through possibilities. We give them exactly what they want. A dying old man ready to hand over his legacy. And then, we destroy them. Catherine Frost's office sat on the 14th floor of a nondescript building in the financial district. The kind of place that deliberately avoided attention. Samuel Reeves had described her as the best forensic accountant on the East Coast, a woman who had helped bring down 3 Ponzi schemes and a corrupt state senator. When I walked through her door carrying a folder thick with financial records, she barely looked up from her computer screen. Dr. Hartwell, she said, her voice cool and professional. Samuel told me you have a complicated situation. Please, sit down. I placed the folder on her desk along with the GenMed acquisition agreement and the transaction histories Melissa had extracted from the USB drive. Catherine opened the folder and began scanning the documents with the intensity of a surgeon examining an X-ray. Her fingers moved quickly, flipping pages, pausing occasionally to type something into her computer. These transfers, she said after several minutes of silence, they're sophisticated. Whoever designed this knew exactly what they were doing. I watched her work, noting how her eyes narrowed at certain figures, how she occasionally muttered numbers under her breath. The afternoon light filtered through dusty blinds, casting long shadows across stacks of files that lined every available surface. Tell me what you see, I said. Catherine leaned back in her chair and removed her reading glasses. I see $12 million. Moved over the past 18 months through 6 different shell companies, each one registered in a different jurisdiction. The trail ends at a numbered account in the Cayman Islands. $12 million. The number hung in the air between us, like a physical weight. But here's what concerns me more, she continued, pulling up a screen full of transaction logs. These transfers were executed using your authentication credentials. Your digital signature appears on every authorization. That's impossible. I never approved these transfers. I know. She pointed to timestamps on the screen. Every single one occurred while you were either in board meetings or traveling internationally. Someone has been using your credentials without your knowledge. Someone with intimate access to your schedule and your security protocols. The implication was clear. Only a handful of people had that level of access, and one of them was my own son. Catherine spent the next 3 hours dissecting the financial records while I sat in silence, watching decades of trust crumble into dust. She uncovered correspondence between Daniel and GenMed's CEO, discussing what they called a leadership transition opportunity. The language was careful, almost clinical, but the meaning was unmistakable. They're planning a hostile takeover, Catherine explained. But they need you out of the picture first. According to these documents, the transition is scheduled to complete in 6 weeks. 6 weeks. That was how long I had to live in their calculations. Can you build a case? I asked. Catherine gathered the documents into a neat pile and looked at me with eyes that had seen countless acts of financial betrayal. I can build a case that will make the FBI weep with joy. Every dollar has a fingerprint, Dr. Hartwell, and I intend to trace every single one back to its source. I stood to leave, feeling simultaneously exhausted and strangely energized. How long do you need? Give me 72 hours, she said. And Dr. Hartwell? Whatever you're planning, make sure you stay alive long enough to see it through. The name Victoria Slade had haunted me since the moment I saw her standing in Daniel's penthouse wearing my late wife's robe. Now, sitting in my study at the Beacon Hill estate, I spread out everything we had gathered about her across the mahogany desk that had belonged to my father. Victoria had joined Hartwell Pharmaceuticals 4 years ago, recruited directly from a prestigious research position at Johns Hopkins. Her credentials were impeccable. Her references glowed with praise. I remembered signing her hiring documents myself, impressed by her publication record and her ambitious vision for our research division. What I had not known then was the darkness that lurked beneath her brilliant exterior. Samuel Reeves had provided the first piece of the puzzle. Victoria had been his graduate student 15 years ago, a prodigy who had completed her doctorate in record time. But their relationship had ended badly when Samuel discovered she had falsified data in a critical study. He had quietly forced her resignation rather than destroying her career publicly, a decision he now deeply regretted. I thought she would learn from the experience, Samuel had told me, his voice heavy with guilt. I never imagined she would become this. Melissa filled in the remaining gaps. Victoria had approached Daniel at a pharmaceutical conference 3 years ago, shortly after my wife Eleanor's death. Their affair had begun within weeks, but this was no ordinary relationship. Victoria had recognized something in Daniel that even I had been blind to see. She had found his weakness, his hunger for power, his resentment toward me, and she had cultivated it like a gardener tending poisonous flowers. The plan they conceived together was elegant in its cruelty. Victoria would design a compound that mimicked natural liver deterioration, something that would appear on any standard toxicology panel as age-related organ failure. Daniel would administer it through the daily supplements he so lovingly prepared for his devoted father. Within a year, I would be dead, and no one would suspect anything other than the sad decline of an aging man. But Victoria's ambitions extended far beyond simple murder. The documents Catherine had uncovered revealed her true vision. Once I was gone and Daniel controlled the company, she would orchestrate its sale to GenMed for $200 million. Daniel would receive his inheritance plus his share of the sale. Victoria would emerge as the new company's chief science officer with complete autonomy and a compensation package worth tens of millions. And if Daniel ever became inconvenient, I suspected Victoria had contingency plans for him as well. I studied the photograph Melissa had taken secretly, showing Victoria and Daniel together at what appeared to be a romantic dinner. Their body language told a story that words could not capture. Daniel leaned toward her with desperate adoration. Victoria sat back with the satisfied smile of a predator who had already consumed her prey. My son was not the mastermind of this conspiracy. He was merely another victim, too blinded by desire and resentment to see the trap closing around him. This realization brought me no comfort, only a deeper sadness for the boy I had raised and the man he had failed to become. The clock on my desk showed 11:43 in the evening. In less than 6 weeks, according to their timeline, I was supposed to be dead. Instead, I was very much alive, and I was building a case that would bring them both to justice. I gathered the documents and locked them in the hidden safe behind my father's portrait. Tomorrow I would meet with Agent Morrison from the FBI. The trap was almost ready. But first, I needed to visit the place where Victoria conducted her deadly experiments. I needed to see Laboratory B3 with my own eyes. The basement levels of Hartwell Pharmaceuticals were not designed for casual visitors. Security protocols required biometric verification at 3 separate checkpoints before reaching the research floors. But I had built this company from nothing, and there were access codes that even my own security team did not know existed. I waited until 2 o'clock in the morning, when the skeleton crew of night guards would be at their most complacent. Marcus drove me to the facility's service entrance, a loading dock hidden behind a row of industrial dumpsters. He did not ask questions. After 30 years of service, Marcus understood when silence was required. The service elevator descended past B1, the standard storage level, and B2, where we kept temperature-sensitive compounds. When the doors opened at B3, I found myself in a corridor that should not have existed. According to official building plans, B3 was nothing more than a mechanical room, housing HVAC equipment and electrical infrastructure. The reality was something far more disturbing. I walked slowly, my footsteps echoing against concrete walls painted institutional gray. Emergency lighting cast everything in a sickly, yellow glow. The air smelled of chemicals and something else, something organic that I could not immediately identify. The first door I encountered was labeled Storage A. Inside, I found rows of industrial refrigerators humming quietly in the darkness. I opened one and discovered hundreds of small vials, each labeled with a code number and a date. The earliest date was 3 years ago. The most recent was last week. The second room was a fully equipped laboratory, more sophisticated than anything we had on the official research floors. Centrifuges, mass spectrometers, biosafety cabinets, equipment worth millions of dollars, purchased without my knowledge or approval. On a workbench near the window, I found a notebook filled with Victoria's precise handwriting. The entries documented dosage calculations, absorption rates, and something she called terminal threshold optimization. She had been perfecting her poison for years, adjusting the formula until it achieved exactly the effect she desired. Slow enough to avoid suspicion, fast enough to guarantee results. The third room stopped me cold. Filing cabinets lined the walls, each drawer labeled with a patient identification number. I pulled one open and found a complete medical history, including photographs of a man I recognized. Robert Chen, age 54, had died 14 months ago from what his doctors had called unexplained hepatic failure. His family had donated generously to liver disease research in his memory. The file contained Victoria's handwritten notes on his case. She had selected him specifically because his existing health conditions would mask the effects of her compound. She had monitored his deterioration through a corrupt nurse at the hospital where he received treatment. She had attended his funeral. I opened more drawers. Margaret Sullivan, James Whitmore. Each file told the same horrifying story. These were not accidents or coincidences. These were murders, carefully planned and flawlessly executed. And I had been next on the list. My hands trembled as I photographed everything with the secure phone Samuel had provided. Page after page, file after file. Evidence that would send Victoria and Daniel to prison for the rest of their lives. A sound from the corridor froze me in place. Footsteps approaching. The click of heels against concrete. I had only seconds to hide. I pressed myself against the wall behind a storage cabinet, forcing my breathing into shallow silence. The footsteps grew louder, accompanied by voices I recognized immediately. Victoria's cool, measured tone, and Daniel's, eager and subservient. "The latest batch is ready," Victoria said. "I've increased the concentration by 15%. At this rate, he'll be gone within 3 weeks instead of 6. "Are you sure that's safe?" Daniel asked. "If anyone suspects something, an autopsy could reveal." "No autopsy will find anything," Victoria's voice carried the confidence of absolute certainty. The compound metabolizes completely within 72 hours of the final dose. By the time anyone thinks to look, there will be nothing left to find. They stopped directly outside the room where I was hiding. I could see their shadows stretching across the floor through the gap beneath the door. My heart pounded so loudly, I was certain they could hear it. "What about Melissa?" Daniel asked. "She's still out there somewhere. If she talks to anyone, Melissa is a frightened pregnant woman with no resources and no credibility. Even if she tried to go to the police, who would believe her? The devoted son trying to murder his elderly father? It sounds like the plot of a bad movie." Victoria laughed, and the sound sent ice through my veins. "Besides," she continued, "I have people looking for her. Once we find her, we'll arrange a tragic accident. Pregnancy complications. It happens more often than people think. They were planning to kill Melissa. To kill my grandchild." The revelation transformed my fear into something harder, colder. Rage crystallized in my chest, like a diamond forming under pressure. "Come," Victoria said. "I need to check the refrigeration units. The temperature variance last week almost compromised 6 months of work." Their footsteps moved away, toward the storage room at the far end of the corridor. I had perhaps 2 minutes before they returned. I slipped out of my hiding place and moved quickly toward the service elevator. Every shadow seemed to reach for me. Every sound amplified into potential discovery. The corridor stretched endlessly. Each step, a calculated risk. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime that seemed deafening in the silence. I stepped inside and pressed the button for the ground floor, watching the numbers climb with agonizing slowness. B3, B2, B1. Ground. When the doors opened to the loading dock, I nearly collapsed with relief. Marcus was waiting exactly where I had left him, the car engine running, headlights dark. "Sir?" he asked as I climbed into the back seat. "Drive," I said. "Now." As we pulled away from the facility, I looked back at the building I had constructed with my own hands. The company I had devoted my entire life to building. My son was inside, planning my murder with the casual efficiency of a business meeting. But I had what I needed. Photographs of every document, evidence of 3 murders, recorded admissions of their plans for Melissa and the baby. Tomorrow I would deliver everything to Agent Morrison. The FBI would have enough to build a case that even the most expensive lawyers could not defeat. Victoria thought she was untouchable. Daniel thought he was clever. They were both wrong. Agent Derek Morrison was not what I expected. I had imagined a stern man in a dark suit, the kind of federal agent who appeared in crime dramas with a permanent scowl and a badge always ready to flash. Instead, I found a soft-spoken man in his late 40s with reading glasses perched on his nose and a coffee mug that read, "World's Okayest Dad." We met in a secure conference room at the FBI's Boston field office, a windowless space with fluorescent lighting that hummed faintly overhead. Catherine Frost sat beside me, her briefcase filled with financial documents. Samuel Reeves had provided a detailed medical report on the compound found in my blood, and on my phone were hundreds of photographs from Laboratory B3. Morrison listened without interruption as I told my story. His face remained neutral, but I noticed his pen moving constantly across his notepad. Occasionally, he glanced at the junior agent beside him, a young woman named Torres who typed everything into a laptop with remarkable speed. When I finished, Morrison removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "Dr. Hartwell," he said carefully, "what you're describing is not a simple case of corporate fraud. You're alleging multiple homicides, attempted murder, conspiracy, and potentially violations of federal drug regulations. This is going to require coordination between multiple agencies." "I understand," I replied. "That's why I brought evidence." Catherine opened her briefcase and began laying out documents on the table. The Shell Company records, the wire transfers, the GenMed acquisition agreement. Morrison's eyebrows rose slightly higher with each new piece of paper. "This is the financial trail. Catherine explained. $12 million moved through 6 jurisdictions over 18 months. Every transaction is documented. Every signature is traceable. I handed Morrison my phone. These photographs were taken last night in a secret laboratory beneath my own facility. You'll find research notes detailing the poison's development, patient files on 3 individuals who died under suspicious circumstances, and documentation of an illegal clinical trial that was never registered with the FDA. Morrison scrolled through the images slowly, his expression growing darker with each swipe. "The 3 victims," he said quietly. "Robert Chen, Margaret Sullivan, James Whitmore. We received anonymous tips about all 3 cases, but we never had enough evidence to open formal investigations. Now you do." Torres looked up from her laptop. "Sir, if even half of this is accurate, we're looking at a RICO case. Organized criminal enterprise operating within a legitimate pharmaceutical company." Morrison nodded slowly. "Dr. Hartwell, I need to be honest with you. Building a case like this takes time. We need to verify every piece of evidence, interview witnesses, obtain warrants. If we move too quickly and make mistakes, their lawyers could get everything thrown out." "How long?" I asked. "Weeks. Maybe longer." I leaned forward. "Agent Morrison, they're planning to increase my dosage. They want me dead within 3 weeks, and they're searching for my daughter-in-law. A pregnant woman who knows everything. If you don't act soon, there won't be anyone left to testify." Morrison exchanged a glance with Torres. Something passed between them, an unspoken understanding. "We'll expedite," he said finally. "But I need something from you in return. Name it. I need you to keep taking those pills. I need them to believe their plan is working. Can you do that?" I thought of Melissa hiding in the Liberty Hotel. I thought of my unborn grandchild. I thought of 3 innocent people who had died because of my son's greed. "Yes," I said. "I can do that." The performance began the following morning. I shuffled into the dining room of my Beacon Hill estate with the deliberate slowness of a man losing his battle against time. My housekeeper Elena gasped when she saw me, her hand flying to her mouth. "Dr. Hartwell," she whispered. "You look terrible." That was precisely the point. Samuel Reeves had provided me with a carefully calibrated regimen. Each morning, I took his counteragent pills that neutralized Victoria's poison while allowing my body to display convincing symptoms of decline. Pale skin. Occasional moments of confusion that I manufactured with the skill of a veteran stage actor. Daniel arrived at 9 o'clock sharp, carrying the familiar bottle of supplements that he presented with such loving concern. I watched him pour 2 capsules into my palm, noting how his eyes tracked my movements with predatory attention. "You need to take better care of yourself, Father," he said, his voice dripping with false tenderness. "These vitamins will help restore your strength." I placed the capsules in my mouth, took a long drink of water, and swallowed. What Daniel did not see was the sleight of hand I had practiced for hours the night before. The real pills were now tucked beneath my tongue, ready to be disposed of the moment he left the room. "Thank you, son," I said weakly. "I don't know what I would do without you." The words tasted like ash, but I delivered them with the gratitude of a dying man clinging to his family. Over the following days, I perfected my deterioration. I canceled meetings, citing fatigue. I allowed my appearance to grow disheveled, my suits hanging loosely on a frame I deliberately made appear thinner through strategic padding beneath my clothes. I stumbled occasionally when walking, always when Daniel or Victoria might be watching. Victoria visited twice that week, each time studying me with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing an experiment. She brought flowers and spoke softly about the importance of rest. Behind her sympathetic smile, I could see her calculating how much longer I had. "The doctors are concerned about your liver function," she said during her second visit, settling into the chair beside my bed. "Daniel mentioned the latest test results were troubling." "Everything is troubling at my age," I replied, allowing my voice to crack with manufactured exhaustion. "But I have made peace with it. A man cannot live forever. Victoria's smile widened almost imperceptibly. You have such a beautiful perspective on life, Richard. Daniel is lucky to have you as a father. I wanted to reach across and wrap my hands around her throat. Instead, I closed my eyes and pretended to drift toward sleep. Rest now, she murmured, patting my hand with fingers that had designed my death. Everything will be better soon. Yes, I thought as she left the room. Everything will be better very soon, but not in the way you imagine. Each night, after the house grew quiet, I reviewed updates from Agent Morrison. The investigation was progressing faster than expected. Warrants were being prepared. Surveillance teams had documented Daniel and Victoria meeting with GenMed executives at a private club downtown. The trap was nearly ready, and I was running out of time to spring it. The call came at 3:17 in the morning. I was sitting in my study reviewing documents when Marcus appeared in the doorway, his face tight with urgency. Sir, it's Melissa. Her water broke. She's asking for you. I abandoned everything and followed Marcus to the car. The streets of Boston were empty at that hour, slick with autumn rain that reflected the city lights like scattered diamonds. We reached the Liberty Hotel in 12 minutes. A journey that felt like hours. Melissa was on the floor of room 712, her back against the bed, her face contorted with pain. The hotel's night manager stood helplessly in the corner. A phone pressed to his ear as he spoke rapidly with emergency services. Richard. Melissa gasped when she saw me. The baby is coming. It's too early. I knelt beside her and took her hand. You're going to be fine. Both of you are going to be fine. But I could see the fear in her eyes. The same fear that had haunted her since the day she fled from my son. This baby was coming 3 weeks ahead of schedule, stressed into early arrival by months of terror and uncertainty. The ambulance arrived within 8 minutes. Paramedics moved with efficient precision, loading Melissa onto a stretcher while monitoring her vitals. I climbed into the ambulance beside her, holding her hand as we raced toward Massachusetts General Hospital. Don't let them find us, she whispered between contractions. Daniel has people everywhere. If he knows I'm at a hospital, I've taken precautions, I assured her. You're registered under a different name. The only people who know you're here are people I trust with my life. The delivery room was a chaos of controlled urgency. Dr. Helen Park had been alerted and met us at the entrance. Her expression focused and calm. She had delivered hundreds of babies in her career. But I could see she understood the stakes of this particular birth. Melissa's labor lasted 4 hours and 23 minutes. I stayed by her side through every contraction, every scream, every moment of exhaustion and determination. She gripped my hand so tightly I thought she might break my fingers, but I did not pull away. At 7:40 in the morning, a cry pierced the sterile air of the delivery room. Thin and reedy at first, then growing stronger with each breath. It's a boy, Dr. Park announced, holding up a squirming infant covered in the evidence of his difficult journey into the world. Healthy, strong lungs, absolutely perfect. Melissa collapsed against the pillows, tears streaming down her face. When the nurse placed the baby in her arms, something shifted in the room. The fear and tension that had surrounded us for weeks seemed to recede, replaced by something fragile and precious. Ethan, Melissa whispered, stroking the baby's cheek with one trembling finger. I stared at my grandson, this tiny person who had entered the world surrounded by danger and conspiracy. He had his mother's nose and his grandfather's stubborn chin. He was innocent of everything that had brought him here, untouched by the darkness that threatened to consume our family. In that moment, I made a silent vow. I would protect this child with everything I had. I would ensure he grew up in a world free from the poison his father had created, whatever it took. Ethan was only 16 hours old when the danger found us. I had stepped out of Melissa's private room to call Agent Morrison with an update. The corridor was quiet, the morning shift of nurses moving efficiently between rooms. Everything seemed normal until I noticed a woman in scrubs standing near the elevator. her eyes fixed on room 712. She was not a nurse, I recognized. And nurses did not typically wear designer watches that cost more than a month's salary. I ended my call and approached her casually. "Can I help you with something?" The woman smiled, but her eyes remained cold. "Just checking on a patient. Wrong floor. Apparently." She stepped into the elevator before I could respond. But I had seen enough. The slight bulge beneath her scrubs that could have been a concealed weapon. The way she had memorized the room number before leaving. The practiced ease of someone trained to observe without being observed. I returned to Melissa's room and found Marcus already on alert, his hand resting near the weapon holstered beneath his jacket. "We have a problem," I said quietly. "They've found us." Melissa's face went pale. She clutched Ethan closer to her chest, the baby stirring slightly at the sudden tension. "How is that possible? We were so careful." I thought through the possibilities. Hospital records were supposed to be sealed. The admission had been under a false name. Only a handful of trusted people knew the truth, but Daniel had resources I had underestimated. Connections that reached into places I had not anticipated. "Someone talked," Marcus said grimly. "Or they traced your phone signal. Either way, we need to move." Dr. Park arranged for a private ambulance within the hour. Melissa was not fully recovered from the delivery, but staying at Massachusetts General was no longer an option. We transferred her and Ethan to a smaller facility in Cambridge, a private clinic owned by a colleague Samuel trusted completely. During the transfer, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. The text contained only an address and a time. I recognized the location immediately. It was the Hartwell Pharmaceuticals headquarters, specifically the executive boardroom on the 23rd floor. A second message followed. "Come alone, or the pregnant girl dies. We know where she is now." My blood turned to ice. They were bluffing about Melissa's new location. They had to be. But I could not take that risk. I showed the messages to Marcus. His jaw tightened. "It's a trap," he said. "Of course it's a trap." I stared at the screen, my mind racing through scenarios. But it's also an opportunity. They want me at headquarters. They want to finish this on their terms. "Sir, you cannot seriously be considering." "Contact Agent Morrison," I interrupted. "Tell him the timeline has accelerated. We spring the trap tomorrow, but we do it on my terms, not theirs." I looked back at the clinic where Melissa and Ethan were being settled into their new room. My daughter-in-law, my grandson, the family I had nearly lost to my own son's betrayal. Daniel wanted a confrontation. Victoria wanted to tie up loose ends. They would get their meeting. But the outcome would not be what they expected. The war room was my study at the Beacon Hill estate, transformed overnight into a command center. Agent Morrison arrived at midnight with a team of 4 specialists, each carrying equipment cases that looked innocuous but contained technology I could barely comprehend. "We have one chance at this," Morrison said, spreading building blueprints across my father's mahogany desk. "If anything goes wrong, we lose the case and potentially lose you." I studied the floor plans of my own headquarters, a building I had designed and constructed 30 years ago. Every corridor, every room, every emergency exit was familiar to me, but tonight I saw it through different eyes, as a battlefield where my life would be at stake. "The boardroom has 3 entrances," I pointed out. "Main door from the executive corridor, service entrance from the kitchen, and emergency exit leading to the stairwell. Daniel will expect me to come through the main door, which is exactly what you'll do," Morrison replied. "We'll have agents positioned at all 3 exits. The moment we have enough recorded evidence, we move in." Catherine Frost had arrived earlier with finalized documents. The paper trail was now complete, linking every fraudulent transfer to Daniel and Victoria's personal accounts. Combined with the photographs from Laboratory B3 and the toxicology reports from Samuel, we had enough evidence to guarantee conviction. But Morrison wanted more. He wanted confession. "The wire is undetectable," one of the technicians explained, holding up a device smaller than a button. Latest generation. Can transmit through concrete walls. We'll have backup recording equipment in a van parked 1 block away. I unbuttoned my shirt and allowed them to attach the device to my chest. The adhesive was cold against my skin, a constant reminder of what I was about to do. What if they search me? I asked. They won't find it, Morrison assured me. And even if they suspect something, the moment they make any threatening move, we're through those doors in under 30 seconds. Samuel Reeves arrived with a final dose of counteragent and instructions for the hours ahead. Your liver function has stabilized significantly, he reported. But don't push yourself. The stress of tomorrow could trigger complications if you're not careful. I thanked him, knowing that careful was not an option. As dawn approached, I sat alone in my study, composing a letter I hoped would never need to be read. It was addressed to Melissa and Ethan, explaining everything that had happened and everything I had done to protect them. If tomorrow went wrong, they would at least understand why. Marcus appeared in the doorway at 6 o'clock sharp. The car is ready, sir. I folded the letter and placed it in my desk drawer. Then I stood, straightened my tie, and looked at myself in the mirror. The face that stared back was older than I remembered, worn by months of poison and weeks of deception. But the eyes were clear and determined. Today I would confront my son. Today I would expose the woman who had tried to kill me. Today, one way or another, this nightmare would end. Let's go, I said. The Hartwell Pharmaceuticals building had never looked so imposing. 23 floors of glass and steel rising against a gray October sky. A monument to everything I had built and everything my son was trying to steal. I entered through the main lobby at precisely 9 o'clock. The security guard nodded respectfully. Unaware that FBI agents were already positioned throughout the building, disguised as maintenance workers and delivery personnel. The elevator ride to the executive floor took 47 seconds, each one stretching into eternity. Daniel was waiting in the boardroom. He stood at the head of the long conference table, silhouetted against floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Boston skyline. Victoria sat to his right, her posture relaxed, her smile predatory. "Father," Daniel said, gesturing toward a chair. "Thank you for coming. Please, sit down." I remained standing. "I prefer to stand. This won't take long." Always so dramatic. Daniel shook his head with theatrical disappointment. "I had hoped we could discuss this like civilized people. The future of the company. Your retirement. The transition of power. The transition you've been planning for 3 years?" I kept my voice steady, conscious of the wire recording every word. "The one that involves poisoning me with a compound designed by your mistress?" Victoria's smile flickered but did not disappear. Daniel's expression hardened. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you do." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folder, placing it on the table between us. Project Succession. That's what you called it, wasn't it? A synthetic hepatotoxin that mimics natural liver failure, administered through vitamin supplements that your loving son prepared every morning. Daniel glanced at Victoria. A silent communication passed between them. "You've been under tremendous stress," Victoria said smoothly. "Paranoid delusions are common in patients with declining liver function. Perhaps we should call Dr. Fisher to examine you." "Dr. Fisher won't be coming. He's currently being interviewed by the FBI about his role in covering up 3 suspicious deaths." I watched their faces carefully, noting the first crack in their composure. Robert Chen, Marguerite Sullivan, James Whitmore. Ring any bells? Daniel's jaw tightened. "Those patients died of natural causes. They died because you used them as test subjects for your poison. And when the formula was perfected, you turned it on me." I stepped closer, allowing years of betrayal to fuel my words. "Your own father, Daniel, the man who built everything you're trying to steal." "Built?" Daniel's voice rose sharply, his careful mask beginning to slip. "You built a prison and called it a legacy. You controlled everything, every decision, every dollar, Every breath I took had to have your approval. I spent 36 years waiting for you to die naturally, and you just kept going. So you decided to help things along. I decided to take what was rightfully mine. Daniel slammed his palm against the table. This company should have been transferred to me years ago. Instead, you treated me like a child, questioning every choice, undermining every initiative. Victoria showed me what I could become without you suffocating me. Victoria placed a calming hand on Daniel's arm, but I could see her calculating the damage his outburst had caused. And Melissa? I asked quietly. What about her and the baby? Daniel's face twisted. That weak, pathetic woman? She was supposed to be a tool, nothing more. When she started asking questions, she became a liability. The words hung in the air. Damning and irreversible. I smiled. Thank you, Daniel. That's exactly what I needed to hear. The boardroom doors burst open with the force of justice delayed too long. Agent Morrison led the charge, flanked by 6 FBI agents with weapons drawn. Behind them came Boston police detectives, their badges glinting under the fluorescent lights. The cavalry had arrived, and there would be no escape. Daniel Hartwell, Victoria Slade, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder. 3 counts of first-degree murder, attempted murder, securities fraud, and violation of federal drug regulations. Morrison's voice cut through the chaos like a surgical blade. You have the right to remain an attorney. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Daniel's face went white. He stumbled backward, knocking his chair to the floor with a crash that echoed off the windows. This is impossible. You can't do this. I'm Richard Hartwell's son. I own this company. You own nothing, I said quietly. As of 6 o'clock this morning, all your shares in Hartwell Pharmaceuticals were frozen by court order. Your bank accounts have been seized. The offshore transfers have been reversed. You have exactly what you deserve, Daniel. Nothing. Victoria moved faster than I anticipated. She grabbed a letter opener from the table and lunged toward me, her face twisted with rage. But Agent Torres was faster, tackling her to the ground before the blade could reach my chest. The letter opener clattered across the marble floor as 2 agents pinned Victoria's arms behind her back. You stupid old man, Victoria hissed as they dragged her to her feet. You have no idea what you've destroyed. The research, the potential, the billions we could have made, all of it gone because you couldn't accept that your time was over. My time, I replied, meeting her eyes without flinching, is far from over. Daniel was handcuffed now, his expensive suit wrinkled, his perfectly styled hair disheveled. He looked smaller somehow, diminished, as if the removal of his schemes had deflated him physically. When our eyes met, I searched for some trace of the boy I had raised, the son I had loved. I found nothing but hatred. You'll regret this, Daniel said as agents led him toward the door. I'll fight every charge. I'll hire the best lawyers in the country. You haven't won anything. I've won everything that matters. I thought of Melissa recovering in the Cambridge clinic. I thought of Ethan, my grandson, sleeping peacefully in a safe room surrounded by people who would protect him. I've won my family back, the family you tried to destroy. The boardroom emptied slowly. Evidence technicians arrived to photograph and catalog everything. Agent Morrison approached me with a rare smile on his usually stoic face. We got it all on tape, he said. Clear confession to the poisoning, the murders, the plot against Melissa, combined with the physical evidence and the financial records. They're looking at multiple life sentences. Neither of them will ever see freedom again. I nodded, feeling the weight of months finally beginning to lift from my shoulders. The building I had constructed with my own vision and determination stood around me, scarred but intact. The company would survive. The legacy would continue, but nothing would ever be the same. I walked to the window and looked out at the Boston skyline, watching patrol cars gather 23 floors below. Somewhere in those vehicles, my son was beginning his journey toward a prison cell. The child I had bounced on my knee, The young man I had groomed to inherit everything. The monster he had become. A father should not have to destroy his own son. But some sins cannot be forgiven. The story broke within hours. Every major news network led with the same headline: Pharmaceutical heir arrested for attempting to murder father. Camera crews descended on Hartwell Pharmaceuticals like locusts, their vans lining the streets, their reporters shouting questions at anyone who emerged from the building. I watched the coverage from the Cambridge clinic, sitting beside Melissa's bed, while Ethan slept peacefully in her arms. The television screen flickered with images of Daniel being led into the federal courthouse, his face hidden behind a jacket thrown over his head. Victoria followed moments later, her expression defiant, even in handcuffs. Breaking news tonight, the anchor announced. Daniel Hartwell, son of pharmaceutical pioneer Richard Hartwell, has been charged with 3 counts of murder, attempted murder of his own father, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Sources tell us the investigation uncovered a secret laboratory where illegal drug experiments were conducted on unsuspecting patients. Melissa reached for my hand. "How are you feeling?" "Numb," I admitted. I knew this would happen. I planned for it. But seeing it on television, watching the whole world learn what my son became, it feels like losing him all over again. The phone had not stopped ringing since the arrests. Board members demanding emergency meetings, lawyers requesting statements, journalists offering exclusive interview opportunities. I had instructed Marcus to handle everything, to shield me from the chaos until I was ready to face it. The financial markets reacted predictably. Hartwell Pharmaceuticals stock dropped 18% in the first hour of trading, wiping out nearly $200 million in market value. Analysts speculated about the company's survival. Competitors circled like sharks smelling blood in the water. But Catherine Frost had anticipated this. Working through the night, she had prepared a comprehensive disclosure document that detailed the extent of Daniel's fraud while emphasizing the company's fundamental strength. By mid-afternoon, the bleeding had slowed. By evening, early investors were already buying the dip, sensing opportunity in the chaos. "The company will survive," Catherine assured me during a brief phone call. "We've contained the financial damage. The real challenge now is rebuilding trust." Trust. Such a simple word for such a complicated thing. Agent Morrison called with an update on the investigation. The FBI had raided Laboratory B3 and seized everything. Forensic teams were analyzing the compound Victoria had created, confirming its deadly properties. Prosecutors were building cases that would take months to prepare, but would almost certainly result in conviction. "The 3 families?" I asked. "The victims. Have they been notified?" "We're reaching out to them tomorrow," Morrison replied. "They deserve to know what really happened to their loved ones." I thought of Robert Chen, Margaret Sullivan, James Whitmore. Innocent people who had trusted the medical system to heal them, only to become unwitting test subjects in Victoria's experiments. Their families would finally have answers, though I doubted answers would bring them peace. The evening news showed protesters gathering outside the courthouse, demanding justice. Social media exploded with opinions, theories, and condemnations. My name trended worldwide, attached to words like betrayal and family tragedy. But in the quiet clinic room, away from the cameras and the chaos, I held my grandson and watched him breathe. "We'll get through this," Melissa whispered. "Together." For the first time in months, I believed her. The federal courthouse in Boston had witnessed countless dramas over its 200-year history, but nothing had prepared it for the spectacle of United States versus Daniel Hartwell and Victoria Slade. I arrived on the first day of trial, flanked by Marcus and a security team Catherine had insisted upon. Protesters lined both sides of the entrance, some demanding harsh punishment, others holding signs that read, "Corporate greed kills." Camera flashes exploded like lightning as I climbed the stone steps, my face carefully composed into an expression of dignified grief. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Journalists occupied every available seat, their notebooks and recording devices ready to capture every word. The families of the three victims sat together in the front row, their faces etched with the particular exhaustion of people who had been waiting years for answers. Daniel entered through a side door, dressed in a gray suit that hung loosely on his frame. 3 months in federal custody had aged him a decade. His eyes, once bright with ambition, now carried the hollow look of a man who had finally understood the consequences of his choices. When he saw me, something flickered across his face. Not remorse, recognition perhaps, an acknowledgement that the game was finally over. Victoria followed, her posture still defiant despite the circumstances. She had refused all plea bargains, insisting on her innocence even as mountains of evidence accumulated against her. Her lawyers had attempted every possible delay, every procedural challenge. All had failed. The prosecution presented its case with methodical precision. Agent Morrison testified about the investigation, walking the jury through the discovery of Laboratory B3 and the evidence recovered there. Dr. Samuel Reeves explained the poison's mechanism, how it destroyed liver cells with terrifying efficiency while leaving almost no trace. Catherine Frost detailed the financial conspiracy, the shell companies, the offshore accounts, the $200 million sale that would have completed Daniel's betrayal. But it was Melissa's testimony that broke the courtroom's composure. She took the stand on the 4th day, Ethan now 6 weeks old, and safely in the care of a trusted nurse outside. Her voice trembled as she described discovering the truth about Daniel, the threats he had made, the months she had spent hiding while pregnant and terrified. He told me accidents happen to pregnant women all the time, Melissa said, her eyes fixed on Daniel across the courtroom. He said I was nothing without the Hartwell name. I watched the jury as she spoke. 12 ordinary citizens, selected to judge extraordinary crimes. Their faces showed horror, disgust, and something that looked like righteous anger building behind their careful neutrality. The defense offered little resistance. Daniel's attorneys attempted to paint him as a victim of Victoria's manipulation, a weak man seduced by a brilliant sociopath. Victoria's team tried the opposite approach, blaming everything on Daniel's resentment toward his father. Neither strategy gained traction. On the 9th day, the jury returned its verdict, guilty on all counts. Daniel collapsed into his chair, his head falling into his hands. Victoria stood motionless, her expression finally cracking as the reality of her future became clear. I felt no satisfaction, only a profound and terrible sadness for the son I had lost long before this courtroom pronounced its judgment. 2 weeks after the verdict, we returned to the same courtroom for sentencing. The crowd had thinned slightly, the initial frenzy of media attention having faded into the routine coverage of a case whose outcome was no longer in doubt. But the families of the victims were still there, waiting for the final chapter of their long nightmare. Judge Elizabeth Warren presided over the hearing with the gravity befitting such serious crimes. She was known for her thorough deliberations and her unwillingness to be swayed by wealth or status. Daniel's expensive legal team had learned this the hard way throughout the trial. Victoria was sentenced first. Dr. Slade, Judge Warren began, her voice resonating through the silent courtroom. You are a brilliant scientist who chose to use your gifts for evil. You designed a poison specifically intended to kill slowly and painfully while avoiding detection. You tested this poison on innocent patients who trusted the medical system to protect them. 3 people died because of your ambition and greed. Victoria stood motionless, her face a mask of carefully maintained composure. For the murders of Robert Chen, Margaret Sullivan, and James Whitmore, I sentence you to 3 consecutive terms of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. For the attempted murder of Richard Hartwell, I add an additional 25 years. For conspiracy and fraud charges, I add 15 years to run consecutively. The numbers were almost meaningless at that point. Victoria would die in prison. That much was certain. She was led away without a word, her head held high, even as the courtroom doors closed behind her forever. Then it was Daniel's turn. My son stood before the judge, his shoulders slumped, his eyes fixed on the floor. The arrogance that had defined him for so long had finally been stripped away, leaving behind something smaller and more pathetic. "Daniel Hartwell," Judge Warren said, "your crimes are particularly heinous because they involved the betrayal of the most sacred bond that exists between human beings. You attempted to murder your own father. You conspired to kill your pregnant wife and unborn child. You participated in experiments that took 3 innocent lives." She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle over the courtroom. "The defense has argued that you were manipulated by Dr. Slade. Perhaps there is some truth to that. But manipulation does not excuse murder. It does not excuse the calculated cruelty you showed toward the people who loved you most." I watched Daniel's face as the judge pronounced his sentence. 25 years to life for attempted murder, 15 years for conspiracy, 10 years for fraud and financial crimes. The sentences would run consecutively, meaning Daniel would not be eligible for parole until he was well into his 70s. "Do you have anything to say before you are taken into custody?" Judge Warren asked. Daniel raised his head slowly. His eyes found mine across the crowded courtroom. "I'm sorry, Father," he whispered. "I'm sorry. I wasn't the son you deserved." The words hit me like a physical blow, not because they offered comfort, but because they came too late. Sorry could not undo 3 murders. Sorry could not erase months of poison coursing through my veins. Sorry could not rebuild the trust he had shattered into a million irreparable pieces. "Goodbye, Daniel," I said quietly. They led him away, and I knew I would never see my son as a free man again. The Hartwell Pharmaceuticals boardroom had been redesigned. Gone were the dark mahogany panels and imposing portraits that had witnessed Daniel's confession. In their place stood bright walls, open windows, and a circular table that encouraged collaboration rather than hierarchy. 6 months had passed since the sentencing. The wounds were still fresh, but the company I had built was beginning to heal. "The third quarter numbers are encouraging," Catherine Frost reported, sliding a folder across the table. "Revenue is up 12% compared to last year. Investor confidence is returning. The stock has recovered 70% of its losses." I nodded, studying the figures with the attention they deserved. Rebuilding trust was a slow process, measured in quarterly reports and stakeholder meetings rather than dramatic confrontations. But progress was undeniable. The board had undergone a complete transformation. Every member who had turned a blind eye to Daniel's activities had been removed, replaced by individuals selected for their integrity rather than their connections. Dr. Helen Park now served as chief medical advisor, ensuring that patient safety would never again be compromised for profit. Samuel Reeves had agreed to lead a new ethics division, tasked with reviewing every research protocol and flagging potential concerns before they could escalate. His first act had been to establish an anonymous reporting system that allowed employees to raise issues without fear of retaliation. "We've also completed the compensation process for the victims' families," Catherine continued. "The settlements were substantial, but fair. More importantly, we've established memorial scholarships in the names of Robert Chen, Margaret Sullivan, and James Whitmore. I thought of those 3 innocent people, their lives cut short by greed and ambition. No amount of money could bring them back, but perhaps their memories could inspire future generations of scientists to choose ethics over expediency. The most significant change, however, sat at my right hand. Melissa had joined the board 3 months earlier, appointed as Director of Corporate Responsibility. It was a new position, created specifically for her unique perspective. She had witnessed the company's darkest hour from the inside. She understood better than anyone the human cost of corruption. "The employee survey results are promising," Melissa said, her voice steady and confident. "Morale has improved significantly since we implemented the transparency initiatives. People feel like they're working for a company that values integrity again." I smiled at her. This young woman who had entered my life as a desperate pregnant fugitive and emerged as one of my most trusted advisors. She had fought for her life and her child's life. She had testified against the father of her baby without flinching. She had earned her place at this table. After the meeting concluded, I stood by the window and looked out at the Boston skyline. The city had changed little in the months since the trial. The same buildings reached toward the same gray sky. The same traffic flowed through the same crowded streets. But I saw it differently now. I had spent 40 years building an empire, accumulating wealth and power and influence. I had believed these things defined success. I had been wrong. True success was not measured in stock prices or market share. It was measured in the legacy you left behind, in the lives you touched, in the values you passed to the next generation. Laboratory B3 had been permanently sealed, its contents destroyed under federal supervision. In its place, we were constructing a new research wing dedicated to developing affordable treatments for liver disease. The irony was not lost on me. From poison to cure, from betrayal to redemption, the journey was far from over. But for the first time in years, I could see the path forward. The paperwork sat on my desk for 3 days before I found the courage to sign it. Legal adoption of an adult was unusual but not unprecedented. Melissa had been married to Daniel, which made her my daughter-in-law in the eyes of the law. But with Daniel facing decades in prison and their marriage formally annulled, that connection had been severed. What remained was something deeper, forged in crisis and tempered by shared survival. "You don't have to do this," Melissa said when I first proposed the idea. We were sitting in the garden of my Beacon Hill estate, watching Ethan crawl across a blanket spread over the autumn grass. "I don't need your name to know that you're family." "I know," I replied, "but I want the world to know it too." The adoption would accomplish several practical goals. It would ensure Melissa's position within the company was unassailable, protected by the Hartwell name that still carried significant weight in Boston's business community. It would guarantee Ethan's inheritance rights, establishing him as my legal grandchild, regardless of his father's crimes. And it would send a clear message to anyone who might try to challenge our reconstituted family. But beyond the practicalities, there was something more profound at stake. I had lost my son, not to death, but to something worse. Daniel had chosen greed over love, ambition over family, and in doing so had destroyed everything we might have shared. The emptiness he left behind was a wound that would never fully heal. Melissa had given me a chance to fill that void, not as a replacement for Daniel, but as something entirely new. A daughter I had chosen rather than one assigned by biology. A relationship built on trust and mutual respect rather than obligation and resentment. The signing ceremony took place in my attorney's office on a crisp November afternoon. Melissa wore a simple blue dress, her hair pulled back in a way that reminded me of my late wife Eleanor. Ethan sat in her lap, babbling happily at the strange new environment filled with leather-bound books and polished wood. "By signing these documents," the attorney explained, "you are establishing a legal parent-child relationship with all the rights and responsibilities that entails. Melissa Hartwell will become your legal daughter. Ethan Richard Hartwell will be confirmed as your legal grandchild." I picked up the pen and signed my name with the same decisive stroke I had used on 1,000 contracts throughout my career. But this signature meant more than any business deal I had ever closed. Melissa signed next, her hand trembling slightly as she wrote. When she finished, she looked up at me with tears glistening in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything." I reached across the table and took her hand. "No, Melissa. Thank you. You saved my life in more ways than one." That evening, we celebrated with a quiet dinner at the estate. Marcus had arranged for Eleanor's favorite flowers to be placed throughout the dining room. Helen Park joined us, along with Samuel Reeves and Catherine Frost. The people who had stood by us through the darkest hours now gathered to witness the beginning of something brighter. Ethan took his first steps that night, wobbling across the living room floor toward my outstretched arms. When I caught him, lifting him high above my head while he squealed with delight, I felt something I had not experienced in years. Joy. Pure and uncomplicated. I had a daughter. I had a grandson. I had a family worth protecting. And this time, I would not fail them. The Hartwell Foundation for Medical Ethics was announced on a gray December morning, exactly 1 year after I had first discovered Melissa crying outside the oncology clinic. We held the press conference in the lobby of the newly renovated research wing, the space that had once housed Laboratory B3. Journalists filled every available seat, their cameras trained on the podium where I stood beside Melissa. Ethan balanced on her hip in a tiny suit that made him look like a miniature businessman. 1 year ago, I began, my voice steady despite the emotions churning beneath the surface. I learned that the son I had raised and the company I had built had been corrupted by greed and ambition. 3 innocent people lost their lives. My own life was nearly taken. The trust that patients place in pharmaceutical companies was betrayed in the most fundamental way possible. The room was silent, every eye fixed on me. Today, we take the first step toward ensuring that such betrayal never happens again. The foundation would be funded with an initial endowment of $30 million, drawn from my personal accounts and supplemented by contributions from board members who wished to demonstrate their commitment to the company's new direction. Its mission was simple but ambitious: to promote ethical practices in pharmaceutical research and hold companies accountable when they failed to meet those standards. Melissa stepped forward to describe the foundation's specific initiatives. A whistleblower protection program that would provide legal and financial support to employees who reported misconduct. An independent review board that would audit research protocols at pharmaceutical companies nationwide. Scholarships for medical students who demonstrated exceptional commitment to ethical practice. "We cannot undo the harm that was done," Melissa said, her voice carrying the quiet authority she had developed over the past year. "But we can honor the memories of Robert Chen, Margaret Sullivan, and James Whitmore by working to prevent others from suffering the same fate." The families of the 3 victims had been invited to attend the announcement. I watched as Margaret Sullivan's daughter wiped tears from her eyes, her expression a complicated mixture of grief and gratitude. These people had lost loved ones to my company's failures. No foundation could bring back what they had lost. But perhaps it could give their suffering meaning. After the press conference concluded, I found a quiet moment alone in the garden courtyard that had been constructed in the center of the research wing. A bronze plaque on the wall listed the names of the 3 victims, accompanied by a simple inscription: "In memory of those whose trust was betrayed. May their sacrifice inspire us to do better." I stood before that plaque for a long time, letting the winter wind bite at my face. Building a pharmaceutical empire had been the work of decades. Building a legacy of integrity would take even longer. But I had made a start. Melissa appeared beside me, having left Ethan with Helen Park inside. She did not speak, simply stood with me in companionable silence as we contemplated the names etched in bronze. "Do you think it's enough?" she finally asked. I considered the question carefully. "No," I admitted. "It will never be enough. But it's something. And something is better than nothing." She nodded slowly. "Then, we keep building." "Yes," I agreed. "We keep building." 18 months after the trial, I sat on the porch of my Vermont farmhouse watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. This property had belonged to Eleanor's family for generations. We had spent summers here during our marriage, escaping the pressures of Boston for the simplicity of country life. After her death, I had not returned. The memories were too painful, the silence too loud. But now the farmhouse was alive again. Ethan toddled across the wooden deck, his small feet slapping against the boards as he chased a butterfly that had wandered too close. At 18 months old, he had his mother's dark hair and his grandfather's stubborn determination. He fell, picked himself up without complaint, and continued his pursuit. Melissa emerged from the kitchen carrying 2 glasses of lemonade. She had changed so much from the terrified pregnant woman I had found crying outside that clinic. Confidence had replaced fear. Purpose had replaced desperation. She moved through the world now with the quiet assurance of someone who had faced the worst and survived. "The quarterly reports came in," she said, settling into the chair beside me. "Revenue is up another 15%. The new liver disease treatment passed phase 2 trials." "Good," I replied, accepting the lemonade with a nod of thanks. And the foundation? 3 more companies have agreed to participate in the ethics audit program. We've also awarded 12 scholarships this semester. She smiled. Samuel says we're making a real difference. I watched Ethan finally catch up to the butterfly, his chubby hands closing around empty air as it fluttered away. He looked back at me with an expression of comic disappointment, and I laughed despite myself. Come here, little one, I called, opening my arms. He ran to me with the unsteady grace of toddlerhood, climbing into my lap with complete trust. I held him close, feeling his heartbeat against my chest, smelling the clean scent of baby shampoo in his hair. This was what Daniel had tried to destroy, this simple moment of peace, this ordinary miracle of family. I thought sometimes about my son, locked away in a federal penitentiary in Pennsylvania. I had not visited him. I was not sure I ever would. The wounds he had inflicted were too deep, the betrayal too complete. Perhaps someday I would find forgiveness in my heart. Perhaps I never would. But I had learned something important in the months since his arrest. Family was not defined by blood alone. It was defined by choice, by commitment, by the daily decision to show up for the people who depended on you. Daniel had been my son by biology. Melissa had become my daughter by choice. And in the end, choice meant more. Ethan squirmed in my lap, pointing at the butterfly that had returned to circle the porch railing. Fly, he said. One of the dozen words he had mastered so far. Fly. Fly. Yes. I agreed, kissing the top of his head. It flies. The sun continued its descent, the sky shifting from gold to purple to the deep blue of approaching night. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called out, beginning its nightly hunt. The air grew cool, carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney. Melissa reached over and took my hand. Her grip was warm and strong. Happy? She asked. I considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. My body still bore the scars of Victoria's poison. My heart still carried the weight of Daniel's betrayal. The company I had built would forever be associated with scandal and murder, but I was alive. I had a daughter who loved me. I had a grandson who filled my days with laughter and purpose. I had a legacy that would outlive my mistakes. Yes, I said finally. Ethan yawned, his eyes growing heavy as the evening settled around us. Melissa stood and lifted him gently from my arms. I'll put him to bed, she said. Don't stay out too late. The nights are getting cold. I watched her carry my grandson into the house, the screen door closing softly behind them. Then I turned back to the mountains, now silhouettes against a star-filled sky. Eleanor would have loved this moment. She would have loved Melissa's strength and Ethan's curiosity. She would have understood why I had fought so hard to protect them. I raised my glass in a silent toast to her memory. We did it, I whispered to the darkness. We built something worth keeping. The stars offered no response. But I did not need one. Some truths do not require confirmation.